In this video, we're going to learn how we come to know things and how we come to draw conclusions about how the world around us works. Now, the way that we do this might be biased at times, and we're going to talk about some of those biases in this video. So let's say that you saw this claim. Someone in your life, maybe it's a friend or a family member, said, "I don't believe that smoking causes lung cancer. I know somebody who smoked for 30 years and never got cancer." Well, that sounds pretty stupid, right? And the reason for this sounding pretty stupid is because we know that smoking causes lung cancer. There is a ton of research out there on it. Now, that being said, this is experiential knowledge, or this is information based on experience, right? So we know somebody, or this person knew someone that smoked for 30 years and never got cancer. And you might hear them say something like this and say, "That is completely ridiculous, the end." And I agree, it is completely ridiculous. Now, that being said, though, we do this type of stuff all the time in our everyday lives without realizing it. The example there is very extreme, and it's obvious that smoking causes lung cancer, right? We've known this for decades now. But take, for example, the more common things that we might see. So something like a vaccine being dangerous. I know someone who got a vaccine and had a heart attack a month later. Now, is it possible that a vaccine could cause a heart attack? Could, right? And that should be tested. Vaccines should be vetted across time and place. But simply knowing someone, and the thing that I'm pointing out here is simply knowing one person who got a vaccine and then had a heart attack a month later, that is not sufficient evidence to discredit a vaccine. We would need something much more structured and controlled to go ahead and test this. What about spanking children doesn't make them more aggressive? I was spanked and I turned out okay. Again, we're not evaluating the claim. Now, there is research out there on spanking children and aggression, and you're welcome to go see that information. What I'm pointing out, though, is the experiential issue here. They're basing their entire conclusion on their one outcome, that they were spanked and turned out okay. And again, this is when we base information on experience. We do this all the time. Take, for example, you go to a restaurant, and maybe this restaurant was recommended by a ton of different people, and it has almost 5 stars on Google. You go, your food takes forever. It was mediocre food. Maybe it was a little bit burned, and you're like, what do? Well, you probably never go back again, but the reality is they might have just had an off night. I worked in food service. Sometimes we had off nights. And the other thing, let's take for another example. Let's say you're getting ready to buy a car and you say, maybe I want to buy a Hyundai Tucson. Right, so I own a Hyundai Tucson, and someone says, "Whoa, don't buy that. My ex-husband's sister-in-law's kid had a Hyundai Tucson, and the wheels fell off while they were driving." Well, you're probably not going to buy that car because of that very salient example that someone just told you. And that's the reality, is often we base what we think about the world on very salient information that comes to mind easily, and oftentimes that's gathered through our experiences or our vicarious experiences through others. Now, what can we gather? What information can we gather from a single experience, right? So let's say that there's a race. There's runner 1, runner 2 here. And runner 1, so we run this race, and sure enough, runner 1 wins. They beat runner 2, and they even kind of ran circles in doing so. Now, that's just meant to be a fun video, but the question then becomes, what information can we draw from this one experience? So, did runner 1 win the race? Well, objectively, yes, that is correct. Runner 1 won the race. If this were a real race, though, could you say for certain that runner 1 is faster than runner 2? Well, this is where my students usually, at least, start to get a little bit of a puzzled look on their face. Because do we have evidence that runner 1 might be faster than runner 2? Sure, we have some evidence. But is it a lot of evidence? Not really. It was a single race. What if runner 1 was sick that day? Or what if runner 2 was sick that day? Or what if runner 1 took steroids that day or something like I don't know. I mean, but there's a number of different things that could have influenced that. Maybe runner two had a bad start that day, or maybe runner two twisted their ankle right before the race. There's so many extra factors that could be at play. So now we're getting even more ridiculous, but can you say for certain that people with runner one's hair color are faster than people with runner two's hair color? Absolutely not. This is even more far-fetched. What about, can you say for certain people who wear runner one's brand of shoes are faster than people who wear runner two's brand of shoes? Probably not, right? So why can why can we not say yes to all except the first answer? So why are we okay saying yes to the first one but not to all of the rest here? Well, because the first one is just objective, did runner one win the race? And the rest are based on extrapolating beyond that one situation, such as the restaurant sucks after one time eating there. This person's an asshole after having one interaction with them. Why are all of this race or group of people behaving in this way? People are taking individualized examples and extrapolating to draw conclusions about entire groups of people. Why are all conservatives or why are all liberals this way? So again, people are using experience or a one-off interaction to draw conclusions and broader conclusions about the world around them. And this is the issue with drawing conclusions on the basis of experience. So let's put it into words. What are the real issues here with experiential knowledge? Well, one, there's no comparison group. So you're just drawing conclusions based on what you're seeing. Oftentimes humans, in evaluating the world around us, we have biases. A lot of times that bias is on the basis of things like confirmation bias, where we look for things that confirm our preconceived beliefs and we ignore things that go against that. And then there could be confounds, such as a confound is anything that could influence this effect that you're not actually studying. Take, for example, that running example that I just used. If runner two had twisted their ankle, right, that would be a confound. It's not that necessarily that runner one is faster, it's that something got in the way of runner two. Another way that we come to understand the world around us is by drawing conclusions on the basis of authority figures. So this is where we actually rely on information from a quote-unquote expert. Why are there quotes around the word expert? It's because oftentimes people look or sound like an authority figure even when they're not. So let's take TikTok, for example. I'm on TikTok all the time, just like a lot of other people in this world. And oftentimes we see someone who appears to be an authority figure, someone who is potentially wearing a white lab coat, right? And they look like a medical doctor. And, we see this person and we say, that makes sense, right? Whatever they're saying, I'm going to accept it because they're wearing a white lab coat. But let's look at this from a logic standpoint, right? All doctors wear white coats, right? That's our premise. And we see TV or social media experts wear white coats. Therefore, TV experts are doctors. Well, there's a jump in logic here, and from a logic standpoint, this makes no sense. But from a human standpoint, we're more likely to believe someone wearing a white coat because they seem to be an authority figure. They're speaking with what we assume to be credibility because they're confident in what they're saying. They have lots of followers on social media potentially, and they just appear to be an authority figure. Well, when could trusting an authority figure actually be a good thing? Because is it true that there could be a real medical doctor on social media giving advice? Sure. Now, what we need to be careful of is this person speaking in their area of expertise? So if I'm drawing conclusions about health from a real nutritionist or medical doctor, absolutely, it makes sense. But if a doctor is speaking on things, like if a medical doctor is speaking on things relating to racism, discrimination, or how to improve the workplace or things like this, they don't have expertise in that area potentially, and it would be better to look at someone like an industrial organizational psychologist or a social psychologist who actually does have expertise in discrimination or in things like how to make people more effective in the workplace. And so the issue becomes, if we just blindly follow and blindly listen to people that we perceive to be authority figures, that can be an issue. Now, listening to someone who is a real authority on a topic, it's not necessarily a super bad thing, right? And so what we need to do, and the advice that we need to follow, is to vet that authority figure. Do they actually have the credentials to speak on this topic? Are they speaking based on actual research that they and others have conducted, or are they just giving opinions that could also be biased? That's the real issue here. And the last one here is basing information on intuition. This is information that sort of feels right. So I'm going to give you an example. This is actually called the birthday paradox. So the question is, how many people need to be in a room? How many people need to be in a room before we can be at least 50% confident that at least two of these people share a birthday? Now, oftentimes, and I encourage you actually to pause this video and just kind of think about this. How many people need to be in a room before we're at least 50% confident that two people share a birthday? Now, there's a number of ways that students oftentimes approach answering this question. Some of them take the guaranteed route, and when I ask them, they say 365 people, therefore I'm guaranteed to have, at least, but that's 100% likely that you would have two people sharing a birthday. So that's not really the correct logic, but a lot of people do adopt that logic. Other folks adopt sort of actually even worse logic here, but it's okay. Logic is actually quite difficult for a lot of people. But the next fairly common answer I get is people actually double 365. And they go up to 730 here. Well, the jump there is, of course, we would have people matching birthdays because you have more people in the room than there are days in the year. You actually doubled it. But the reason that they went with that, and the reason that their intuition said to do that, is they knew it was like some factor of 1/2 or double, and they made a logic error, but that's okay. People make logic errors all the time, and they said, okay, I'm going to double it so that we're pretty likely that two people would share a birthday. The sort of better or the logic that a lot of people go with, and a high degree of people would go with this next piece of potential logic, is they take 365 divided by 2 and they give me an answer somewhere around 180 to 185. This is kind of a really thoughtful way of approaching this question. But now, how many people actually do need to be in a room before at least two people share a birthday? You might be surprised to learn that the answer is only 23. And the reason for that is intuitively, when people try to answer this question, they focus a lot on what is the likelihood, or rather the unlikelihood, that any two people are going to share a birthday. And they say, here's person 1 or person A, and they say, what's the likelihood that they share a birthday with person B? And it's very unlikely, right? It's 1 in 365, right? Because, this person has a birthday, and then the likelihood of them sharing with this other person is 1 in 365 days. But what they don't consider is that there's also person C and person D and person E. And they're not taking into account what's the likelihood that person A shares a birthday here, what's the likelihood that person A shares a birthday here, what's the likelihood that person A shares a birthday here. And it is true that any one of these lines is highly unlikely that they would share a birthday. But then when you factor in that B and C could also share a birthday, C and D, B and D, B and E, all of these folks could also share a birthday. By the time you get 23 people in a room and you look at all of these in combination, it actually becomes 50% likely that when there's 23 or more people in a room, at least two of them share a birthday, which is a remarkably low number. And oftentimes, until they've seen this birthday paradox, and there's YouTube videos on this if you really want to see the math behind it, it is incredible. We only need 23 people in a room before at least two of them share a birthday. But intuitively, oftentimes that doesn't make sense. Take another example. A lot of times people, when they're, maybe they just turned 21 and they're a college student and they're excited for the first time to go to a casino, and they start reading up on strategies. Maybe they want to play blackjack, or maybe they want to go play roulette. But take, for example, this bet that I've circled down here on either red or black. So those of you that aren't familiar, when you're playing roulette, you can make a number of bets. You could bet on any one of these 36 numbers to be rolled. You could also bet on 0 or 00 to be rolled, which, by the way, is where the house edge is, because if you're betting out here and a 0 or 00 gets rolled, you are going to lose your money there. That's the house edge. But a fairly common strategy among new bettors is to either bet on red or black being rolled. So if a red number gets rolled and you bet red, you get double your money that you bet. So the issue here is that there's a strategy that when people first hear about it, they're like, yes, I'm going to win a ton of money. And they go to the casino and they think, I'm going to win my money. So this is called the martingale strategy, where you bet, let's say you bet $10. So $10 is a very frequent table minimum, or even 15. Casinos have pretty high table minimums. So let's say you bet $10. The idea behind the martingale strategy is that if you lose, you double your bet and bet again. And so if we're thinking about this, so the first bet was $10. The second bet was $20. The third bet is $40. And the idea behind this strategy is that you initially bet $10, and if you lose, you're now down $10. So the next time, if you bet $20 and win, well, you win that original. So let's say you lost. So at this point, if you lose, you are at negative $10. But if you win the next bet, well, you win $20, which bumps you up to being up 10. And the idea behind this is eventually I'll win. Eventually I'll win. And let's think about this, though. The thing that people don't take into account is it is true that probably at some point, if you continue to double, at some point red is going to get rolled again. But let's look at what happens if we were to continue to lose. By bet 5, you're already betting $160 just to get back to even and be up $10. By bet 6, you're now betting $320. By bet 7, so let's say you had 7 or 6 losses in a row and you're placing your 7th bet, you are now gambling $640 just to get back to being up 10. The next time, if you somehow lost 7 in a row, you would be gambling $1,280 again just to win $10. So a lot of people, when they first hear about this strategy, they immediately latch on to it's a 50-50 chance I'm bound to get red again. What they fail to take into account is that getting 8 losses in a row is going to happen a lot sooner than you are going to gain $1,280. So could this strategy work and work for a while? The reality is yes. But if you're like me, you don't go into a casino with all that much money, you would probably be capped right here. And guess what? Your day would last for about 15 minutes if this was the case. You're going to get 4 losses pretty rapidly trying this strategy. A lot of times people don't realize how common it is for losses to stack and to continue to build and continue to build, and they can lose a lot of money by adopting this strategy. So the bottom line is that intuition is frequently wrong, and we'll see in class just how wrong this can be. Now this flowchart nicely summarizes everything that I've talked about in this video. So if we believe information, this can be based on experience, which we already talked about. The issue is that there's no comparison group and that experience has confounds. Now we could also base the information that we believe on intuition. This is things that are cognitively available, and that can potentially cause issues because we as humans are oftentimes biased. We look for things that confirm our beliefs, like looking at the likelihood of rolling, or like the with the martingale strategy example that I just discussed, the likelihood of losing 8 times in a row is pretty low, and we focus on that. That being said, it does happen, and at that point, we will be wiped out. And so, oftentimes, when we base our information on intuition, we can be biased. Now, when we base this information on authority, like we said, if it's based on the authority figure's research, that's great. And by the way, anything in bold here or in dark black outline and black lettering, this is pretty good. It's not a bad thing to trust an authority figure when they are speaking in their area of expertise. But if they're speaking based on personal experience or their intuition, that's when authority could be an issue. Or if they are a fake authority figure acting as though they have authority when they don't actually. Even better would be if we based our information on research, especially that which comes from scientific sources, such as that by psychologists. This would oftentimes be published in journal articles or in chapters in edited books or even in full-length books. Now, you might ask yourself, which of these is probably the best? And a lot of times people say that the full-length books are probably the best because they're compiling tons and tons of information. Now, that being said, while I'm not going to say that a full-length book is bad, it tends to be the case that the most empirical and scientific heft is going to come from gathering information from journal articles, especially those published in an empirical article. And the reason that this is going to be so much better is that these undergo the peer review process. And the peer review process is where anywhere from 2 to 5 reviewers are going to review this article, and it's someone that isn't, friends with or included on this paper. It's an expert in the field who gets asked to review this paper. That process makes the scientific process better. You might actually be surprised to know that full-length books are oftentimes handled by editors and are not actually always peer-reviewed, and so oftentimes empirical articles are going to be the ones that probably have the most scientific heft. Now, that being said, full-length books are usually still pretty good sources of information, especially when they're citing and correctly discussing empirical work. Now, based on other sources, though, is where it can be a little bit tricky, even if these have some foundation in research. So take, for example, things like Wikipedia, or take, for example, things like pop culture articles. So whenever I publish an article, every now and then a news source or a pop culture source writer might reach out to me and say, hey, can I interview you about your article? And yeah, I say yes, that'd be great. I don't mind my research getting out to the lay public and people making it accessible. But that being said, oftentimes it is overblown, and it is the issue is these pop culture articles are trying to make it digestible for a wide audience. They're trying to make it captivating and engaging, and the issue is that the science behind it can oftentimes be watered down, or the nuance can be glossed over. And so it is oftentimes true that things in pop culture are either overblown or are potentially even factually incorrect based on the actual science discussed in the article, and that can be a real issue.